Win some Proline tyres, win some Proline tyres. Or you can win, get this puppy out of here, a winch. And it even comes with its little worn sticker. How cool is that, eh? So guys, that's going to be this year's competition. Some guys need tyres, some guys need a winch. Write me in the comment which of the two you need, and I shall put you in the draw. Now let's get back into today's video. On this week's show, we are taking the MB Scaler off the shelf. Kind of forever. Now we have a truck here that has a great drivetrain. The entire setup of the truck is actually not bad. So why do we leave it on the shelf? Well, we kind of don't want to scratch it. It's pretty, and it crawls kind of well. Its capabilities are kind of good, but they're not that good. So we do have a lot of rollovers. I do damage it every now and then. I have to put Serious Black back into his position because he just topples over and his head's like all over the place and his arm falls off and his hand's like detached to his arm and all those kind of things. I want to make this truck capable enough so when I get invited to scale events that I can actually go to scale events. I've got some ideas where I'm going to be taking some hill climbing setups on the suspension to make this truck capable so that we can actually drive it without that constant fear of damaging it too much. So my ideas are to get the truck as stable and as steady as possible. So we're going to have some suspension changes. What I'm going to be doing to the front suspension is keeping the nose of the truck planted in the rock. So when it goes into an obstacle, climbs an obstacle, you don't have that fear of it tilting over or flipping over onto its back. I'm going to minimize the travel so that when it goes into an obstacle, it doesn't pull into full droop, and then we get that top heavy sensation where we go, oh my gosh, you know, it's gonna go. And you know how it is when you're crawling, you will always try and get past it. And then you're going to flip your beautiful truck, your scaler truck that you actually don't want to damage. So to keep the suspension as low as possible, I'm going to add a spring onto the inside of the shock absorber so that it cannot go into full droop. It'll keep it kind of in the center. The longer I make that spring, the lower down the front of the car will be pulled. And on the rear suspension, I'm going to limit the travel so that it doesn't sink in. So I'm always got the best angle. So I'm going to limit the travel of the actual shock absorber so that I cannot get past that point where I get into my unstable position again. So basically what you have your truck, as it goes into an obstacle, the weight goes down on the back and you change the angle. Then once the angle gets too far, the droop of the front suspension goes and you flip over, or you're a bit on a side hill and you flip over onto the side. Now, we're going to prevent it with these minor setups, and I'm also going to be adding some tires because my major concern is that the truck is just too wide. Now, if we put some tires on it, the tires kind of have to stick out, and yeah, it's not going to be that scale anymore. But we can always change tires, right? Everybody changes tires, everybody puts big wheels on their trucks. So my idea is to get the stance a little bit wider so that the wheel actually catches the obstacle and it doesn't scrape on the body. Because what I've actually done on this particular section here, I had to rebend these little wires that hold the axe in, and the little spade is constantly coming loose as well. Now, these little wires here actually get caught on the obstacles. And if I am able to get the wheel a little bit further out, I will not have that issue anymore. So, first step, let's take the wheels off and look at the rear shock absorbers. So I will be needing some tools for this. I have a 10 weight oil, which is quite liquidy, but I also have I used to race the FG Cup. I have a Franz Gröschel oil that I have left over from one of my Porsche Cup racing days, which is a bit thicker. It says it's a 4000. I actually like the thickness of this. I don't actually know if I can compare it with a 30 or a 40 weight. It just says 4,000. Now, back in the day, I was in my 20s when I raced, so this is basically 30 years old. But it's still good. And I have a packet of little goodies, which I will need the offsets out of this bag because I want the wheels to be standing out a little bit. The wheels that I have are Mickey Thompson's. I'm going to be using my Mickey Thompson on my beadlocks. I'm going to be using the hubs in the front, and I will be using the normal ones, leaving them open in the back. Now, to get these offset, I need to I need to get my hex extensions in there. So I have one that's out of aluminium and one that is made out of copper. The copper one will obviously go to the front. So basically what happens is this one goes in there, because this is, I think it's 1.5 centimeters. And because this is so long, you will need a different bolt to actually catch the thread that's in there. But we get to that later. Let's put that aside. So I've got the rear shock out. Now on this truck, you do not have the possibility of changing the height of the shock absorber. You can change it front to back. So at the moment it is in the front setting. It will stay in the front setting. But normally what you do is you lower the shock absorber, enabling or not enabling the axle to actually articulate too far. Now I don't have that possibility on the shock tower. I'm not going to be changing this shock tower. I'm going to try and keep the truck as original as possible. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be limiting the shock travel. So instead of the shock going all the way down when there's weight on the truck while it's on a hill climb or going up an obstacle, I'm going to be limiting it so that it only can go about halfway. With that, the angle of the truck literally stays more level to the obstacle. It doesn't pull out or it doesn't sink in at the back. So in the beginning, when I got this truck had these little spaces, or the shock absorbers had these little spaces in them. I found that was a little bit silly because it limited the travel of the shock. Now it had it in all 4 shocks. So basically the first thing we did is we took them out. And everybody on YouTube kind of said, this is ridiculous, we need more travel. So they took them out. Now I'm going to put them back in on the rear shocks because I actually don't want that travel. I'm just going to nick this quickly. Be careful that you do not damage your shaft with your pliers. That's why I'm catching them on the inside. I'm actually not catching them here. I'm catching the shaft on the inside here and just holding it a little bit so that I do not damage the shaft while I am working on my shock absorber. Now, my first idea was to put the one original back into its place, but then I'm kind of like looking at this. If I would screw this back on again, I still have 2/3. So I'm literally only taking away 1/3 of the travel. I want actually less than that. So I'm going to be adding another little tube onto that. This is the tube that used to be in the front. I cut it in half, and that kind of gives me half of the travel that I used to have. That's kind of where I want to be. So let me connect everything again and very gently tighten it. There we go. And now I'm not opening this shock. I actually just wanted to limit the travel so that I cannot go further than this point. I'm going to put my spring back on, clip everything together. There we go. And now I have a shock that has limited travel. With that, the body doesn't sink all the way down and get too much of an angle to get into a risky position where we might damage our truck. And not just that we damage our truck, this makes it a lot more capable because the truck is just much sturdier and you can actually pass the obstacle safely. Not just safely, but you can actually pass the obstacle. We all seen how the MB crawler handles. So with this setting, limiting the back and limiting the front, the angle can't protrude and we will have a much more controllable ride. Okay, mounting the shock back into its position. On the MB scaler, make sure that you're using the right screws for this, or in this case they're actually bolts, because you have a long one that goes into the axle holding the stabilizer and the shock in place. Then on this side it has a little bit of an extension that goes towards the shock tower. And I'm not mounting it in the back, I'm mounting it in the front. Basically that is its original position, so that we don't have any jamming up of the shock while it's traveling. So both shocks are done, and we can kind of see that it is very limited, and that's kind of what I want. I don't want the back to be having too much travel. Now I am still, hang on, let me see if I can balance this a little bit so I can use my other hand. Whoa. So my spring setting is almost as high as possible. I've got about 1.5 millimeters turned down of the limit. So the spring is almost at the top. I mean, you can set this any way you like. I haven't changed the oil in this because I didn't need to at the moment. So probably I'm going to be running this first run, or our first scale meeting, with the original oil in it. So we've sorted out the limit on the rear shocks. The other important part is to make your truck a little more capable on steep obstacles, or steeper obstacles, hill climb obstacles, or just obstacles that are steep for a very short time, is your wheelbase. Your wheelbase should not be under 32 centimeters. And by coincidence, this truck is 32 centimeters. Now I don't have to change any of my links. I'm quite happy with that. So I will leave everything underneath the chassis, all the links I will leave the same. I'm not going to touch that on the MB scaler. Now let's get into the front wheels or the front shocks. Now on the front shocks, I am going to be inserting this tiny little spring on the inside of the shock, not allowing the shock to go into full droop. Now this is, you can purchase this at any Chinatown, or you could actually kill one of your ballpoint pens, because on the click system of the pen you will find these. So what I've done with this, I've cut it in half, so I have one for the left shock and one for the right shock. This is exactly 1.8 centimeters long, which is a little bit of a stretch. I had to actually pull it to get it to 1.8. I stretched the spring just a touch, but this spring is basically just to limit the shock, not that I get too much flex or droop out of the front shocks. So basically what the spring will do, it will keep the shock absorber, because I'm going to be mounting this on the inside, pushing the shock up, so it's actually pulling the nose of the truck down, so that I cannot get full droop anymore, because the spring will not allow that to happen. The spring will be sitting inside and actually limiting my full droop. So when the car goes into the obstacle and it starts to lose or the angle of the truck is so high, the weight and the force and then the torque of the wheels actually pull the truck over and it'll flip onto its back. This will actually pull the shock down and keep the nose on the rocks. So let me do that quickly. You gotta take the shaft out through the top. So in this case, what you do is you open the top of the shock. I mean, I've done this on the TRX4 as well, and it's kind of the same method. You open the top of the shock, push the shaft up through the top as slowly as possible so that you don't make a big mess. And now the important part is you actually have to hold your finger down here, because once you pull this out, all the oil will just run out. So now what we do is we take our little spring and we just slide it over the shaft. So you're kind of getting what's going to happen here. So when this starts to, if this wants to go into full droop, it can't. It'll get pushed back up, keeping the nose of the truck down. And then you just insert it back into its position. Make sure it just wiggles in there. And now, I actually just want to check. This is very thin oil. I'm actually going to go with a 10 weight. I'm just going to top it up with 10 weight because this seems to be a very, very thin oil. Okay, just a couple of drops. I don't really need a lot. Okay. Now just moving it up and down slowly. So basically what I'm creating is a rebound, but a permanent rebound with a spring that I've just put in here. Closing it. So you can create a rebound by pushing the shock in all the way and then closing the top. Then your rebound will kind of always suck or pull the shaft back in. In this case, the spring is already limiting the travel. So you kind of see now our shock is shorter. It can still extend, but it always gets pulled back in. So it actually is pulling the axle and keeping the nose, or the nose of the truck on the rocks. And that's both sides. So even if you get into a little bit of an angled obstacle, the nose is always tucked in the front, not losing balance or threatening to actually flip over. So that's it. You can kind of see this is a lot shorter. Now all I need to do, put my spring back on, and I'm also going to run the setting as on the spring as low as possible. So I'm not going to have a lot of tension on the spring. I actually want it to pull in. If I put tension on the spring, it'll just push that shaft out again and it'll just pick the nose up off the obstacle. So I'm going to leave as little tension on my big spring as possible. So that's why my setting will be right at the top all the way. And let's mount it back together. More. That was very brittle. Did you guys see that? I'm actually not happy with that. I broke it! Make sure you don't over tighten these ball joints too much, because what's going to happen is your pin, your threaded pin that sits inside is actually just going to push against the corner on the inside of this. So once it comes to its limit, it's just going to push and it's actually going to break it off. So just like feel it and then don't over tighten these. Okay, a little bit more. Just a touch more. And there. Okay, perfect. Now, get my spring back on here. And my little cap. And there we go. Now this still gives me enough suspension. I've probably taken more than a third out of its travel. It still gives me enough suspension, and I want this truck to sit as low as possible in the front. At the back, it doesn't really have to be as low as possible, but there should be hardly any suspension with the weight of the truck actually sitting on this. So I think once the weight of the truck sits on this, it'll go down maybe another centimeter. So there is still enough movement in the shock. You're not going to be damaging anything if you go a little bit faster. The MB Scaler doesn't go very fast, so you don't really have that issue. But some guys are maybe, you would think of putting another motor, a little bit of a faster motor in here, which I don't think is necessary, because you have enough wheel speed to actually get over all the obstacles. So you don't really need that massive wheel speed. The wheel speed that it has at the moment in its stock form is more than enough to actually do everything. I haven't come across an obstacle where I didn't have enough wheel speed. But anyway, let's mount this quickly. And I have been invited to a little scale meeting. It's not like we're going to be 5 guys. It's just going to be a friend of mine. And he has amazing little blazer that he put together for his girlfriend. The guy that sits in there can, moves his hand with the steering wheel and even shifts gear. I will do a little footage. I will shoot some footage on that once we're out. And this truck has got tiny tires. I forgot the size of the tires, but they're really they little tires like this. And it's really made to look scale. I'm obviously going to be putting tires on here that are maybe not proportional, or they are proportional to the truck, but they're going to be oversized, and I'm going to offset them. So I kind of need to do that to get this truck on the trail without my constant fear of damaging or snapping the windscreen or breaking the lights or anything. Of this little light, the runway light that is on the truck, I've actually damaged it a little bit as well. I flipped it over and it snapped in half. I don't want these things to be happening to this truck, so that's why we are doing what we're doing. We haven't mounted our tires. All right, let's do that quickly. I am going to be needing, number one, I'm going to be needing the chrome. Let's close this 10 weight oil for a second. I'm going to be needing, oh no, this is the one. I'm going to be needing, for the front of the truck, I'm going to be using this bronze weighted offset hex. I'm going to pop this one off. This is a little plastic one. I'm going to pop that one on there. There we go. And first thing I need to do is actually take the little hubs off so that I can actually screw this down. Let me do that quickly. Now I'm going to be using them just for aesthetic reasons, so that at least we're keeping it a little bit scaled. So there we go. Put my tire on there with my offset, and now comes the other fun part. I have to have this long bolt instead of the original, because it's offset by 1.5 centimeters, and this won't catch the thread that's in there. So this actually goes and catches that thread because my offset is so long, or so much. So once you've done that, you just screw this extension piece in, and weirdly it doesn't fit onto our normal tool, so I'm just going to tighten it with my pliers very cautiously that I don't slip. I'm going to put my hub back on. And I've just realized I've put the wrong wheel on the back. Mickey Thompsons have a direction. And there we go. This is the right tire for the left side of the truck. So, got all my tires, my Mickey Thompsons on the MB Scaler, our little Willys Jeep. And one important thing is, if you do take your tires, your original tires off, make sure that you just put all the little screws back in place, because you're going to lose them. We all know how that ends up. Put everything back in place, and then you know where your screws are. If I lose all my little offsets, these are for a different set of bead locks. I'm gonna have to keep these little hex. If I do put the original back on, I'll obviously be needing these. Make sure you have all four. I'm gonna put them in my little bag, and the other ones, all four nuts to secure your rims. Put everything in the bag, secure it, so that you know where you put it. And you'll find it again in case you want to do a wheel swap, or in case, let's say, you have to be full scale on some kind of a scale meeting where you get points for originality. Then obviously these tires are not going to cut it. We'll have to put the original back on. So now that's why I'm keeping everything safe, know where to find it. And let's talk about what we've done. Now, as you can see, there's hardly any suspension in air suspension, but it's very, very little. The reason for that is the suspension at the back. Once we are actually hill climbing, we are not going further. The angle of the body is not going to change. On the front as well, you can see there is hardly any droop. So the body cannot get such a steep angle. Like if you have your tires and you go into the obstacle, your body mainly does this, and you go into full droop, or the shock absorbers go into full droop, and you lose your balance. In this case, this is not going to lose its balance. Those little springs are doing a fantastic job to keep the weight of the truck and the angle of the truck as in an optimal position. And I know, okay, yes, you're going, oh, but you know, you're killing the look, blah blah blah, with the wrong tires. To get the stance out a little bit more, I mean, on my original tires, they actually sit inside the frame a little bit. So yeah, we have probably got more than a centimeter of offset to the original that we have. But to keep it all a little bit true in scale, I've got those little hubs on here where you can clearly see the front and the rear have different hubs. So yeah, keeping it a little bit true to its look. And if it's going, you know, it doesn't look too mean, it doesn't look too offset. Yeah, the tires are really sticky tires. That's why I use these, because I want as maximum performance as I can get. So that's why I chose the Mickey Thompsons at the moment, because I don't want to be losing grip. And the whole reason is I don't want to damage the truck. So let's go on the trail. I mean, I know it's going to be good. I have to prove it to you. Let's go on the trail and you will see what this has actually, or how much this setting, the suspension setting, has changed. And keep in mind that the 32 centimeter wheelbase, I would have changed it, but I didn't have to. But if you don't have 32 centimeter wheelbase, go to 32, or maybe a little bit further, 33, 34, then you will get this kind of a performance out of your truck. Anyway, let's stop talking. Let's do some driving.
No, ok. Frankenstein.
Okay.
Pero hay shit cero, ¿sabes?
Dale. Ja. Nombre de chico, conductor, ¿qué nombre?
Cletus.
Cletus. Cletus. No.
John.
John. Nombre mío. Jake.
Jake.
Jake. El Jake. Pero original es Sirius Black. Es Sirius Black. Wow. Muchacho. Check.
Jake, right.
Check. See. Last set, see. Mais tira. Ah, okay.
Corté el chasis de nuevo.
Cambia. Sí. Very good. Oh, perfect. Do that again.
Vamos, Ion. Okay. Do the snake.
That's hot. Yeehaw! Sí. Sí, claro, sí. All movies.